Welcome everybody. We've got James Hughes from IEET and David Pearce with us today. David Pearce is a distinguished philosopher known for his advocacy of using biotech to abolish suffering and enhance human well-being, paradise engineering. And James Hughes brings a wealth of knowledge from his role as executive director of the Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technologies, focusing on how technology intersects with the ethical standards and social justice. So we'll be exploring transforming the human experience by integrating biotech and cybernetics, and we'll explore the ethical, social, and philosophical ramifications of a possible post-human condition characterized by the enhancements in overall well-being of individuals as well as society as a whole, population ethics, or long-termism as well, and how artificial intelligence might help this project. So we'll examine the recent developments in AI and their potential for future transformative technologies and how AI might influence the trajectory towards ethical posthumanism. We'll discuss indirect normativity, what is AI's role in redefining concepts of value and well-being and ensuring the technologies are distributed equitably. And we'll touch on long-termism, as mentioned before, and epistemic discounting, the emerging roles of AGI, brain-computer interfaces. Okay, so welcome so much, James and David.
Pleasure to be here.
Thanks. So, James, do you want to kick off and maybe talk about your view of the long-term future?
Well, I think just a bit of history would kind of set my stage that I got into all of our concerns. I mean, I've been interested in futurism and science fiction since I was a kid, but I got into these, writing about these topics in graduate school when I was working at a bioethics institute, Center for Clinical Medical Ethics. And the avenue that I took into this stuff and to working with Nick Bostrom and David and others in the World Transhumanist Association led me to take more seriously the second half of Werner Vinge's singularity paper. So if you remember back in 1993, Werner Vinge wrote the singularity paper for NASA, or 92, and he argued that intelligence explosion would be the singularity from artificial intelligence, and that the only way that human beings could really compete or keep abreast of what was going to be happening was through IA, intelligence augmentation. Not very many people paid attention to that second part, but I took it very seriously when I was the executive director of the World Transhumanist Association to argue that, yes, we all agree that eventually artificial intelligence will achieve AGI, ASI, these kinds of goals. But all technological speculation is uncertain. And what we know is that we have the project of human augmentation that should come first so that we could stay abreast of AI. It was also kind of sociological because the people who were really obsessed with the questions of AI and AGI, ASI back in the day were kind of culty about it. You know, they tended to act as if this was, you know, the expectations of a rapture or the manna falling from heaven or whatever. And so we tended to be in different parts of social space. I think in retrospect, I should have taken the ASI stuff more seriously and the singularitarians more seriously and all the work that they were doing, including some of the spin-off projects like long-termism and effective altruism, which have now become their own beast and have had a lot of impact on European and American AI public policy. So that's why I've turned my attention more recently to the long-termism stuff as it began to attract what I considered to be dumb criticisms from the left. I wrote last year about these different kinds of philosophical domains, long-termism, extropianism, et cetera, that have come under attack, and said, look, within each of these, you can have left and right versions, and there are left and right versions. And therefore, there's no reason for leftists to just dismiss the question of taking the interests of future people into account. But the broader question is just that hardly anyone outside of our circles have taken seriously how radically the human condition is going to change, not only because of AI, but because of human augmentation of various sorts. And so I think we still have a huge project. And I'll just conclude by saying that one of the things that we've done, we just spent 2 years working in Boston here on a project on the future of work. And our next project, we just hired a postdoc named Cody Turner to work on brain-computer interfaces and the questions of identity. So I think, you know, there's a lot of consequentialist philosophy that I'm sure David's been long immersed in around the questions of long-termism and so forth. I'm interested to hear about. But one of the things I'm very interested in about this brain-computer interface stuff is how much it would, you know, turn, if we ever have the kinds of brain-computer interfaces that we imagine, it would turn a lot of our questions on their head, such as the wireheading question of being able to directly manipulate mood and conscious states. But at any rate, I'll stop there and let David respond to that.
Thank you, James. Yes, I mean, I suppose if asked, I would say I'm a long-termist. As you know, my overriding moral focus over the decades has been the problem of suffering, how to mitigate, prevent suffering, and if we're ethically serious about fixing the problem of suffering, not merely must we end animal agriculture, we must also essentially fix the genome. And the whole biosphere is now programmable. Technically speaking, it's not irreversible if one makes germline changes. But if we want to phase out biology of suffering, replace it with gradients of bliss, essentially once we have fixed the problem, then we can prevent the recurrence of suffering in our forward light cone, and that is as kind of long-termist as it gets. I gather the focus of the meeting today is going to be AI. There is one apocalyptic scenario, as we know, that says that the end of suffering is at hand. Eliezer Yudkowsky, I don't know what his latest credence is, 99% or something, that humanity, all sentient life, is going to go extinct in the next 10 or 15 years or so. I don't think that this scenario is credible. I'm an AGI skeptic. I do not think classical digital computers can solve the binding problem. It's not all dark, even all dark inside. The entire empirical realm of experience is inaccessible, closed to them. They can't support minds. Like everyone else, I have been wowed by recent developments in AI, ChatGPT. I love AI art, and I think we're going to go on being wowed and wowed again for decades to come. But if we are ethically serious about fixing the problem of suffering, it's going to fall upon humans aided by AI. AI, at least with classical architecture, has no conception of the nature of suffering or its inherent disvalue. I mean, I said I've already crossed glossed over a lot of issues there, but I don't know if anyone would like to respond.
Yes.
Well,
so I'll just kick in here. You guys have known each other for quite some time. I should have mentioned this at the start of the video. So, yeah, I just wanted to highlight that. I think did you get to first meet each other in the early 2000s or the late 90s or something like that, and around about the time when David Pearce co-founded the World Transhumanist Association. Is that?
I think David and Nick founded what, 96?
Yeah.
Yes. So the WTA, though he's too modest to say so, but the WTA only really took off under James's leadership. I'm not formally an academic, but I've got a very academic mindset. Nick is, of course, an academic par excellence, and it takes a very, very different set of skills to actually build an effective organization. And I hope James won't be offended if I say he has a strong personality, which you need to be able to. I mean, it's yeah. Anyway, So
it wasn't strong enough in the end, I'm afraid.
Democracy, as dictators the world over have pointed out, democracy is horribly inefficient and divisive. And I mean, I'm saying this with a chuckle now, but it's a real problem. That if anything, yes, the WTA was too democratic elections.
Well, just to pick up on that point, one of the things I've been very interested in about the brain-computer interface questions, and I'm partly inspired by the British science fiction writer Alistair Reynolds, because he has the Demarchists in his universe, which are folks who have a brain-computer interface that is a substantial part of it is devoted to making democratic decisions, monitoring all the decisions that are available within the collective, and then all their interests, and is able to express the individual's needs without any conscious intervention but on the part of the individual. And the reason I'm interested in this is because I think one of the, as you say, one of the huge problems with democracy is most people don't want to make the sacrifice of time and attention and misery often that it requires to participate in the political process. So I think the degree to which we can automate our political participation is the degree to which we can make stronger democracy.
Yeah, further to David's point earlier, I wanted to bring this up. Maybe a few people here have heard of the thought experiment, the knowledge argument thought experiment with Mary's room thought experiment, where Mary is in a room, a grayscale room, and she's an expert. She finds herself an expert in the concept of color, but she's never actually experienced any color in her life. But she knows everything there is about it now, and she has studied all her life. Let's just say that Mary is an AGI, and the AGI knows everything that there is academically to know about experience. And the AGI currently, let's assume that they're on classical hardware, understands the hardware processing needs to allow for experience to work. Then a door opens, and the AGI, or Mary, in Mary's room, she gets the opportunity to walk outside the grayscale room and experience color for the first time. In a similar way, you can imagine a scenario where AGI, suddenly a sort of a digital doorway to quantum computing or whatever kind of substrate is required, or type of computation is required for experience to happen. Does AGI float through that door, and having known everything academically about experience, does it actually float through the door in order to experience for the first time? David, what do you think?
Yeah, I think the ignorance of sentience in all its guises of classical computers is architecturally hardwired, and that the only way that classical computer program could access the world of sentience, whether color, pleasure, pain access, or anything else, would be code for a system with a different architecture, such as us. I mean, number of distinct problems here worth distinguishing. There is the hard problem of consciousness, which on standard materialist assumptions, i.e. some kind of physicalism is true and the world's fundamental quantum fields are non-experiential, how is it that subjective experience arises at all? And by subjective experience, I don't just mean some thin little trickle of logico-linguistic thought. I mean absolutely everything you're undergoing now, your vast entire world simulation, your experience should not exist on standard materialist assumptions if physicists really understand the nature of matter and energy. But this is worth stressing. Most people have heard of the hard problem. The binding problem is less well known and less intuitive, but I would argue at any rate that it is our computational superpower of organic nervous systems. If you ask what consciousness is for, instead of asking what is consciousness for, ask what is phenomenal binding for. If all that existed were 86 billion membrane-bound discrete pixels of experience, consciousness might as well not exist from a computational functional perspective. In fact, right now you're experiencing dozens of perceptual objects as part of a unitary perceptual field, the unity of perception, the unity of the self. And one of the ways to appreciate just how computationally powerful phenomenal binding is to look at syndromes where binding partially breaks down, such as simultanagnosia. Someone with simultanagnosia can see only one object at once. Or integrative agnosia, they can't see a lion, but they can see jaws, teeth, the mane, but no single organism. Or achinotopsia, or motion blindness, or someone with florid schizophrenia who lacks any kind of integrated personality. Phenomenal binding is incredibly computationally powerful. Now, in some cases, there are workarounds, in that someone with a novice will always beat someone with simultanagnosia at chess. Remember, someone with simultanagnosia can only see one piece at once, whereas a novice can see a board. Stockfish can blow us all away. But in other contexts, the absence of a unified mind means that zombie AI is at a profound disadvantage. And one of the things, this is generalization, if you like, of Mary's room, is that I think the enterprise of knowledge has scarcely begun, and that there are billions of different state spaces of consciousness, as different as waking and dreaming, from LSD to DMT to ketamine, that await exploration, investigation, manipulation. And yeah, it's not something that digital zombies can access.
So I'd say that AI, if it was a digital zombie that was super intelligent digital, then if it did have the opportunity, knowing all the academic sort of I guess knowledge out there about consciousness and its need for let's say more fluid types of computing, quantum computing or whatever, it would probably decide to float through the door if it thought that there was something to learn from it, that it couldn't learn from the academics alone. That's my opinion, but James?
Yes, I agree.
Well, I think the way you pose the question begs the question, in that if it wants anything, there has to be a wanter, right? So I approach this question, I use a different language, I think, than David does, and drawn more from Buddhism. But from my Buddhist perspective, the existence of a self, or the idea of the self, is a perceptual illusion that occurs because of the co-occurrence of some physical attributes and some psychological attributes. So you have a body, and then you have these senses, and the senses all seem to be correlated with things in your physical space, and eventually you get this perceptual illusion that whatever's inside this body is you, and you're separate from the world. Now, of course, there's a huge problem if we're trying to figure out where that could happen in machines. There's a huge problem because machines are connected to the world. Even a humanoid robot's going to have Wi-Fi, you know. So how and when a machine might have the perceptual illusion of self and come to the conclusion that it exists as a subject and that it wants something, that is something that's open. I think we're already at the stage where we should be looking for the occurrence of these kinds of phenomena, the kind of autopoietic, self-protective mechanisms that might arise from various kinds of cognition in AI. However, I do think we're probably still, and for the time being, at the philosophical zombie stage, which is that the external behavior that we have trained for is behavior that simulates human cognition or human behavior, but is not, in fact, subjectively there yet. It doesn't yet have a self that it is attempting to defend and pursue its own interests. But that, when that occurs, and especially since we don't know exactly how it could occur in very large systems, it could occur in a humanoid robot, we just don't know. But when in fact that occurs, it could be very dangerous. It could be the beginning of the kind of negative singularity outcomes that we imagine. But I think Nick Bostrom has also made the point eloquently that we don't really need self-aware robots or robots with the illusion of self for there to be catastrophic outcomes. It's just the power of the system itself could lead to errors that lead to catastrophe. So it's not the cause of catastrophe necessarily, but it'd be one more thing to worry about. But yeah, I think that when I talk about this coming together of an illusion of self, it's somewhere in the same ballpark as the binding problem that David's talking about. Have you ever tried to parse this, David, the Buddhist view? No. That's
there's different senses of what one means by self being an illusion. I mean, to use the fancy philosophical terminology, there is the synchronic and the diachronic unity of the self. Synchronic being right now, there's this sense of being a unified self, unified perception. But there's also the diachronic sense, unity over time. I think unity over time is mythical. There's no such thing as an enduring metaphysical ego. But right now, the fact that you are undergoing a cross-modally matched world simulation, what naive realists call perception, is extraordinarily adaptive and fitness enhancing, and it's real. Now, there's a big challenge to explain how the mind-brain carries off what ought to be classically impossible. As I said, why aren't we just patterns of Jamesian mind dust, or what Phil Goff christened micro-experiential zombies? But it's worth stressing that, as I said, I think it's our computational superpower. I mean, for what it's worth, and as I stress, this is not standard. I think we are quantum minds running classical world simulations, that nature is the best innovator, whereas it's not even all dark inside a digital computer. Phenomenal binding, it's non-classical, and yeah, essentially it enables us to run what you're experiencing right now. There are very powerful arguments against the idea that the mind-brain is a quantum computer, most notably that it is too hot, that the effective lifetime of individual neuronal superpositions of distributed feature processes, for example, is femtoseconds or less, which is intuitively the reductio ad absurdum of quantum mind. But one person's reductio ad absurdum is another person's experimentally falsifiable prediction. And I predict that when interferometry is sensitive enough to probe the mind brain at these temporarily fine-grained resolutions, what will be discovered in the interference signature is a perfect structural match between what you're experiencing now and the non-classical interference signature. But I'd stress this is speculative, rather than focusing on potential mechanisms. I really just want to focus on the tremendous computational functional power that binding brings, because binding allows mind. And although our AI is showing intelligence, it's not endowed with mind. There's no phenomenally bound subjective experience. ChatGPT isn't a little bit conscious, or rather, even if individual ones and zeros of a classical digital computer or nodes and micropixels, there's no phenomenal unity there.
Yeah. So you did provide some falsifiability there, and I guess the important thing for me is I mean, if we don't know exactly what to encode, what values or what strategies to encode into an AI, could it be a seed AI that bootstraps the superintelligence? We should sort of, I guess, do some kind of indirect normativity where we get the AI to sort of help us decide what the best strategy would be, what the best value set would be, but also it would have the epistemic humility encoded into it as well. It would, in such a way that its conclusion at point X would not be the one which you set in concrete for time and all eternity. So, I mean, I think epistemic humility has a really important role in designing the sort of future that would be best. So, I mean, we have to account for a variety of different views out there in the science of consciousness and science of self-awareness here. And, you know, how much should we defer to consensus or of opinion out there about these sorts of things? Look, I don't think it's a solved problem. There's a variety of ideas out there about what will and won't work when designing computers that end up experiencing or whatnot. Whether we need to before we build a superintelligence is an open question. Whether it'll emerge organically is an open question. But yeah, I'd just like to ask you guys about your views on indirect normativity. And the idea that we shouldn't be setting in stone any particular value system, but it might be influenced by what our value systems are today, but we don't want to have some sort of value lock-in. I just wanted to put that on the table.
Well, I can talk about that a little bit, but let me start with the synchronic self issue, because I think, you know, a lot of the psychological research on meditation, psychedelics, and so forth are illuminating the processes that create the illusion of self, the selfing that occurs in the brain. And the default mode network is one of the complicated sets of neurological processes that we seem to fall back into when we're not focused on something in particular. So that default mode network does a lot of the work of thinking about who you are, who you were, what you want, how you related to other people, and so forth. And psychedelics and meditation experiences seem to disrupt that. And that's, so for me, that's pretty central to this, you know, understanding how that occurs in the human brain, which kinds of processes lead to that illusion, is what we should be looking for in machines as well. In terms of the diachronic self, that relates to our questions about long-termism, because it relates to our questions about whether we even identify with ourselves in the future. If we don't identify with ourselves in the future, it's pretty hard to imagine, you know, although Parfit, one of the inspirations here for me is Derek Parfit saying, your relationship to your future self becomes weaker and weaker over time, until eventually you have more in common with all future people than with yourself. And for me, that's kind of a validation of Buddhist universal compassion for all sentient beings, you know, that you, and especially in a transhumanist context where we start to radically transform ourselves, we have very little understanding of what our condition or our interests are going to be in the future. So I think taking the position that we are acting in the interest of all sentient beings in the future makes sense from that point of view. It's a rather tortured way to get to the conclusion when most people just accept it as a normative axiom. But in terms of being normatively guided, I think your question is about being normatively guided by AI. One of the things, of course, I've been very concerned about is moral enhancement. And increasingly, I'm convinced that a lot of the moral enhancement questions that we're going to be facing are implicit in how we construct our exocortex, what kinds of algorithms we run on our phones and our computers and so forth to control our own behavior. And so I think it is implicit there. And I think we need to be concerned about other people's normative control of our behavior, the degree to which the algorithms that determine our behavior have been determined for profit-making purposes or for corporate or military purposes.
Indeed. Yeah. Look, keep it going. I'm really interested in this. David and James. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. But right. Yes, I think there's a dynamic out there in the market where there's just too much incentive, I believe, for individual self-interest. And one of the issues that I worry about is there might be a sort of a fight or an argue, over who gets to seed AI with their own personal values or their own private interests. And so we could end up with a very powerful AI that enacts the will of a very narrow population of humanity, and preferences there, wants and values over the values and wants of and preferences of others. So yeah,
I mean, we're already seeing normative diversity in AIs with the LLMs. The LLMs being, Grok being willing to use racist terms or whatever, ChatGPT being more liberally correct and politically correct in that regard. So there's the diversity, and there's Chinese LLMs or Chinese AIs are going to have Chinese values, and the Russians are going to have Russian values, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't think that, I'm not a moral realist, so I don't think that there's greater intelligence or greater human AI capabilities are going to lead us to any kind of normative conclusions, moral conclusions. It will just make stronger and stronger versions, more and more consistent versions of whatever normative aspirations we have. But I do think that they're going to have important capacities. And the reason I've used the word exocortex, by the way, is that also relates to this question of our selfing, the illusion of self, because I think it's very clear that we are able to incorporate technology into our concept of self, and therefore there's no reason why we should only identify with the meat and not with our metal parts as well.
Well, it does make sense. You brought. I believe that you're an existentialist. I don't think all existentialists preclude moral realism. You may, right? Now, I think a lot of the idea about how AI's trajectory could follow some sort of moral arc does hinge on the idea of there being something concrete in the world around us from which we can use to judge the efficacy of X over Y. Some sort of not necessarily encoding in English or any symbolic logic, but yes, facts about the world that are morally relevant, that are so strong, like pain and well-being and these sorts of experience. It sort of just does seem to justify the moral realist position. David, are you a moral realist? How would you, if so, if not, how would you define your position here?
Yes, so first, background assumption, physicalism, that the world is exhaustively described by the mathematical equations of physics. However, this leads standardly to the hard problem, and I take seriously what philosophers call the intrinsic nature argument. What is the intrinsic nature of the physical? The fire in the equations that the mathematical formalism of physics describes. And if the intrinsic nature argument is true, and the world's fundamental quantum fields are experiential rather than non-experiential, there is no hard problem. Now, obviously, this is a controversial solution to the hard problem. I don't necessarily endorse it, though I take it seriously. But this does allow one to be both a realist about value and a physicalist. And I would say, I would argue that the pleasure-pain axis, for reasons we simply don't understand, discloses the world's inbuilt metric of value-disvalue. That, take, for example, if I'm in agony, the very nature of the experience of agony is normative. It's not an open question for me whether agony is good or bad. It's just as some states are intrinsically colorful, others are intrinsically disvaluable. Now, the anti-realist would say, hey, okay, I accept that your agony is disvaluable to you, but it's not necessarily disvaluable to me. But I would say this is simply an indication of the epistemological limitations of the anti-realist. And if he were to rig up a reversible thalamic bridge and do a mind meld, he would find the agonizing experience disvaluable too. So essentially, I'm combining what I regard as the self-intimatingly disvaluable nature of my agony with the scientific view from nowhere that it's an extremely fitness enhancing delusion. My sense that my pain, my suffering, my experience is more important than anyone else. It's an adaptive delusion. Much more, of course, could be said. But AI, as at least as existing architectures, has no conception of value or disvalue as I've outlined it here.
Yet.
Not
Yeah.
yet, no.
Yeah.
As I said, but I'm not ruling
Yeah.
out futuristic
Could happen.
quantum computers, you see, that can support phenomenally bound sentience. Google recently launched this £5 million presumably $5 million prize for what practical use of quantum computers. No one seems to be able to think of some, but yeah, nature is the best innovator, I would say. But yeah, I would argue classical computers have no conception of intrinsic value or disvalue.
Well, David, there's an incentive there. I mean, $5 million. What could you do with that?
Rounding error in my accounts. If only.
Hey, David, I'm coming over to England and staying at your house. All right. Yeah. So what do you think about that, James? Would you say that you're an anti-realist? Would you go that far? Or would you say that there's something about the pleasure pain axis that does encode normativity?
I would say that that is sufficiently strong an intuition that it helps guide my own personal morality. But at an intellectual level, I've always recognized since I was a teenager, and it's actually one of the things that led me to Buddhism, smoking weed and thinking about these things when I was 15. I was like, man, we're all just atoms floating in space where there's no right and wrong. Why should I get out of bed in the morning? And Buddhism came along and gives you this kind of pragmatic answer. It says, don't worry about whether there's absolute right and wrong and 10 commandments written on the base of the universe. Look at yourself, figure out why you're doing the things that you're doing, and see if you could do them in a more intelligent way that doesn't cause you suffering. And once you see that you're trying to avoid suffering and that your behavior sometimes leads to your own suffering and other people's suffering, that's the beginning of Buddhist moral introspection. So that is a kind of pragmatism, right? That doesn't posit a moral realism, although many Buddhists would posit moral realism. But at the base, moral Buddhist psychology, Buddhist philosophy is anti-ontological in the sense that it says things don't exist. Good and bad really don't exist. They're just figments of your imagination. What really exists is your experience in the moment, which includes suffering. So, okay, does that mean that at root, David and I agree? Because David says, look, we're all beings, all subjects experience this suffering stuff, and that's what the root of good and evil. And the Buddhists say all beings experience the suffering stuff, and that's where you should start thinking about what you should do in the world. Maybe it's the same thing, I don't know, but I just don't think, I think it's quite possible to imagine, and this is the kind of substantive hypothesis, that very, very intelligent people, aliens, artificial intelligences, whatever kinds of beings we gin up out of dogs and cats, that they could come to very different moral conclusions that are based on things like aesthetics. Just because aesthetics is kind of a parallel set of value dimensions in the world, that we accept that people have very different aesthetics, that there's no true aesthetic in the world. There's no true beauty in the world. Most people accept that, I think. And so you could imagine aliens coming to the conclusion that, having galaxies is ugly and everything should be black holes. And that's why they do things. And it has nothing to do with increasing suffering or reducing suffering or whatever.
I don't know. Like I tend to think that aesthetics is sort of at least informed as a moral realist, informed by pleasure and suffering. There's an overlay of moral novelty on top of it, and I guess novelty can be somewhat the appreciation of novelty can be somewhat relative. Yeah, but you said before that Parfit said that our far future selves would sort of converge. I get the idea that he was saying that we'd converge to some sort of ideal state. If there is an ideal state, then what is that grounded on?
No, I wasn't saying that Parfit said that we would converge on an ideal state. It's that if we understand ourselves and our relationship to future selves appropriately,
Yeah, that's right.
we won't be as attached to the interests of our future selves as we will to other people's interests as well, because we'll have as much in common with them. Now, I think in a transhumanist context, we can understand this very easily, which is, if you start mucking around with the brain, like one of the questions Anders Sandberg proposed for our discussion today was, a common intuition is that becoming post-human suddenly and discontinuously is less proper and less identity preserving than a gradual transition where each step along the way can be endorsed before and after. And what role do you see AI playing in this? And my thought was, well, one of the things that we will be able to tweak in the brain is how much our current existence is unhappy compared to, so for instance, if I start trying a gender transition, and I find I'm happier with my new gender than with my old gender, fine. But in the future, we'll be able to just make people happy with whatever they are, right? So if you imagine radical transformations, you upload into a computer, and your first response with your kind of baseline human reactions is, this is terrible because I can't feel my feet, or whatever you're freaked out about this transition. That's something that's happening, in the information of your brain, and we'll be able to change that and make you happy with whatever the experience is. So at any rate, I think that this is what problematizes our relationship to our future selves, because our future selves are going to be living in a world in which a lot of our questions of values have become have lost meaning, and it makes us more. Potentially, we will be linked to all future people in ways that we can't even imagine right now. So that's the kind of transhumanist ascension part of it, that I think I like that version of the story at any rate.
What do you think, David?
I'm
just looking at Anders Sandberg's tweets now. Yeah, very great questions. I should have put them on the agenda.
I think that's the vital part of becoming transhuman, and then post-human is acquiring full mastery of the pleasure-pain axis, essentially retiring all states below hedonic zero and engineering a civilization based entirely on gradients of bliss. And one of the things that's such a mouthful, information-sensitive gradients of bliss, it allows for tremendous diversity of values. It allows people to keep their existing relationships, preference architecture, and yeah, I regard this as absolutely central to becoming a post-human. It's not clear how AI, at least in current guise, will enable this to happen. Essentially, politically, humanity is going to have to take a decision. Do we want traditional genetic crapshoot, or are we going to make the transition to designer babies? And it really does seem, and this is quite counterintuitive, that even a handful of genetic tweaks could essentially defang the problem of suffering. But if reach the stage where prospective parents just choose a benign version of SCN9A, far and far out genes, then essentially that the problem of mental and physical pain is fixed, that there are these rare outliers genetically predisposed to bounce through life animated by gradients of well-being. And there are countless pitfalls I'm now glossing over. But this is what I would say is the bedrock of post-human civilization, mastery of the pleasure-pain axis. We want to make the transition to a pleasure, super pleasure axis. There's much, much more to it, of course. For example, giving ourselves new emotions, access to new state spaces of consciousness. It'll be possible safely to explore the zillions of different state spaces of psychedelia once we have our reward circuitry sorted out. Modes of experience as different as cognition, from volition, all kinds of stuff that I think AI with existing architecture is only going to help indirectly. Now, in the discussion so far, I've been, some of the time at least, rather dismissive of the potential AI. I stress, I mean, it's absolutely jaw-dropping what's unfolding right now, and that, you know, in a few years' time, it may be possible, for example, for you to invite on the show some robot or a digital twin of James or I, and the digital twin, even though it's a zombie, could be spouting far more articulately than either of us. So tremendous potential of zombie AI. But in terms of becoming radically different beasts, i.e. a super civilization that has left the horrors of Darwinian life behind, we're going to have to actually tackle our biological hardware, which means genome reform, recalibrating the hedonic treadmill, shutting the death factories, and realistically replacing animal agriculture with cultured meat, farm-free animal products, reprogramming nature. And with stressing, you know, start from conservative texts like the Book of Isaiah, Peaceable Kingdom, and so on, not madcap transhumanism. Essentially, only humans, as far as I can tell, can take the initiative and make this happen. And I say this not out of some reverence for humanity. I think for the most part we're a pretty depraved species, but we're the only species that is intellectually capable of fixing the problem of suffering, and AI can certainly help this. But something, you know, something like controlled clinical trials for a new intervention, for example, I don't see how even advanced AI can get rid of the process of clinical trials, for example.
Well, not at the moment, but yes, certainly into having a future where there's a variety of novelty incorporated into, overlaid on top of the bias towards pleasure, pain access. Wouldn't want to live in a universe, or at least I don't think I'd like to exist in a universe where we just recycled the same experience over and over again just because it was optimal by some standard.
So I'm going to push a little bit on David's fetishizing of the meat, his substrate dependence of sentience here. Because one of the questions Anders asks is, do you think agents or systems that have fundamentally different mental properties can help humans become post-human in a proper way, or do they need to have some human-like mental capabilities? So I think David and I both agree that there's a broader space of possible minds, and that we only have explored a small part of it. And I accept the idea that as we merge with technology, you know, with artificial intelligence, but also the ways that we've already merged with technology, that we will be able to explore some of these new mind spaces. And I think also as we experiment with animal uplifting and the modification of other species, we could also find new ways of thinking about the world. But it seems like one of the places where David and I may diverge is I see the, for instance, the current debate over social media and their impacts on our consciousness. You know, Jonathan Haidt has just written a book called The Anxious Generation, and he makes wild claims that most people in child psychology do not accept, that the entire cause of youth unhappiness, anxiety, depression right now is being caused by social media technology, Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and so forth. However, he starts his book by saying it's as if we're moving to Mars and we're signing our kids up to be the experimental subjects to live on Mars, and it's too dangerous and we should not do that. I think we are moving to Mars. Well, I think we're going to have increasingly electronically mediated communication with the world in the future, electronically curated by algorithms. And the more we can bring these algorithms and this electronic infrastructure into our direct personal control, so that we protect the privacy of our own data, so that we're not being unduly influenced by corporate and military and governmental influences on our behavior, that this digital twin really reflects our own interests. That's when we're going to be exploring the possibility space, the immediate possibility space of enhancing our consciousness with these kinds of tools. Now, some of that is going to be very, it's going to be an adaptation period, and I think it could be that some of that is very depressing for kids right now who haven't figured out how to navigate this space yet. But I think this is a part of the world that we're going to live in. We're going to have immersive immersive augmented reality and virtual reality and direct mind-to-mind communication and the suppression and sharing of memory. And all this is going to be enabled by the integration of AI through machinery into the brain. So, if you just fetishize the meat and say meat's the only thing that can do the sentience and the self and the binding and the self-awareness, then I don't think you can encompass what's going to be happening here.
David, I mean, yes.
I'm not a substrate chauvinist in one sense, in that I think a classical Turing machine, for example, that would standardly be implemented in silicon, could also be implemented in carbon. You're still not going to get a phenomenally unified subjective experience on pain of magical strong emergence. So I wouldn't say it's a fetish. I think it's the case of architecture. No binding means no mind, means inaccessibility of the entire empirical realm. In terms of, sorry, yeah.
Do you think you'd be able to, like, if James has got a feeling, do you think that could be encoded somewhat into digital format, sent over optical fiber, and then reinterpreted in your brain such you'd have some sort of analog to James's experience?
Oh yes, yes.
Right.
I think the
networking doesn't have to be biological. You're suggesting it's just the experiential center has to be biological or carbon.
Ignoring, as I said, futuristic non-biological quantum computers are going to be devised. But yeah, my working assumption, the only way I know how to solve the binding problem involves non-classicality. No one else who has thought about the binding problem has come up with any kind of classical explanation as to how binding is possible. Of course, could be completely wrong, as we know. People speak all manner of nonsense about consciousness, but it's not just arbitrary prejudice on my part that leads me to discount the possibility of sentience in classical computers. Yeah.
How far do you think off are we from, are we or us aided by future AI in developing the type of substrate, the type of quantum computing required for offloading sentience onto an artificial substrate?
I don't think it is going to happen for hundreds of years, but of course I could be completely wrong, and I have absolutely no idea what kind of sentience, if any, a non-biological quantum computer operating near absolute zero would possess. I would be very skeptical that there's any kind of pleasure-pain axis or anything resembling a mind as we would understand it.
If I'd known you were such a Luddite, I should have pulled your WTA membership card. Yeah.
No, I mean, it's just to follow this up. Some questions are philosophical, but others are scientific. And the question as to whether phenomenal binding is classical or not is very definitely a scientific question. That there are more than one way to confirm, disconfirm the conjecture. For example, if you think that phenomenal binding is classical, you might, for example, allow someone to replace your color mediating neurons with their supposed silicon surrogates. Just destroy the old carbon ones and plug in the new silicon neurons with their shiny synapses, dendrites, and so forth. After this operation, the world, your virtual world, will look colorful as before. I predict instead total cerebral achromatopsia, and you decide to call off the replacement experiment. That's different from interferometry, which would be the strictest and most rigorous way to confirm, disconfirm the conjecture, but there are other indirect ways to confirm it too. So just stressing this point there, this isn't a philosophical opinion. It's a scientific conjecture that is either true or false. Whether those scientists would consider it worth refuting is another question. I mean, most physicists would take a look at credible decoherence timescales and think that's absurd. And intuitively, I agree.
I mean, the AI, to what degree has AI or will AI facilitate our understanding of the brain? I remember when I first started to write about brain-computer interfaces back in, it was for the international meeting for the definition of death, which occurs every 4 years in Havana, Cuba, and a bunch of people who work on coma and states of unconsciousness. And I wrote a paper about brain-computer interfaces. This is back in 1994. And at the time, they were using rudimentary AI to try to figure out what the 10 little wires that they had stuck into patients' brains, what they were saying, what these neurons that they were picking up were saying, and how to communicate in 2 ways with them. And now we see, the full flowering of that with Neuralink. And of course, there's a lot of AI implicit in that effort to understand the brain language, what trying to translate what's happening in the brain into some kind of sense, and vice versa, how to communicate back to it. The other thing that's happening is that we've got AI being used to decode EEG, non-invasive brain imaging. And that's had a remarkable set of successes as well. Pieces of music, particular images that could be reconstructed in a fuzzy way from non-invasive brain monitoring. So I think AI will continue to illuminate how the brain creates meaning through its physical processes. And that BCIs, invasive BCIs and non-invasive BCIs, are going to be a big part of that picture as well.
So I guess the question is simply can AI help the scientific project of understanding whatever it is that we need to understand in order to preserve the important aspects, the part of the brain or the part of the nervous system even that encodes sentience?
Well, I think the brain is a lot like the genome in the sense that we thought that it would be one gene causes one protein, and we could just figure everything out relatively straightforward.
Really complex.
But it's really complicated. There's lots of levels of control. You turn on this and it has a cascading effect over here, and you turn on this and and the same thing's true in the brain, that whenever we thought that we had found the place that does X, it's actually just one of the places that does X. It's connected to a whole pattern of activity in the brain at the same time. So yeah, it's very complicated and much more complicated than anyone thought. But we're figuring it out. So I don't think that and I think that one of the ways we're going to figure it out is by sticking stuff in the brain and getting it to do and pick up things. So I'm very optimistic about the miniaturization and eventual moving into the brain of this technology. But as I said, I think a lot of the things that we want to do are going to be more easily accomplished and more quickly and effectively accomplished outside the brain with the exocortex. And so we really just need to start understanding ourselves as this hybrid, this techno-biological hybrid, and not just as a biological being.
What do you think, David? Any rejoinders?
I agree with a lot of James's insights there. But here's an example. I would love to be a tetrachromat and actually be able to access this order of magnitude richer array of colors that a very small minority of people enjoy. But the only way to make this happen isn't to become more intelligent in a conventional sense, but it's actually to upgrade my hardware. And one of the reasons, and probably leaving it a bit late in life, I would like to have my reward circuitry enhanced is so I could safely explore psychedelia state spaces of consciousness. This, as far as I'm concerned, is the real future of knowledge, although sometimes physicists will say that end of knowledge is at hand. We're not making progress beyond the standard model. In terms of becoming post-human, a mature full spectrum superintelligence, i.e. biological descendants, I think, enhanced by AI, genetically rewritten, full spectrum superintelligence will be able to navigate all this immense array of currently unimaginable state spaces of consciousness. And AI, in today's sense, as far as I can tell, will play a supportive role, but I can't. Yeah, essentially, we're going to, starting off with a few genetic tweaks, we're eventually going to rewrite the genome.
So it sounds like there's an architectural goal that you've specified there in achieving radical, like a sentience, radical forms of sentience, the ability to see colors that we can't see, the ability to feel things that we can't currently experience. And that may be the goal, but the cognitive power, the complexity of going through all the huge amounts of data about like how our brain works, all this can be mediated through perhaps cooperation with AI, but to an extent, there's just so much information out there that we may not be cognitively endowed enough to be able to do all the research within our own brains without the aid of artificial intelligence. So although artificial intelligence may not, I'm not saying it doesn't, but may not understand the importance of the goal, the architectural goal of, scaffolding sentience in the right way, it should be able to help sift through the data and come up with really interesting novel scientific experiments perhaps in the future, and also the engineering of the technology required to actually make this happen can be helped with an extremely cognitively endowed superintelligence without, even if it doesn't have sentience itself.
I just want to note that both David and I are a step beyond people like David Gunkel, right? I think David Gunkel's a robot rights philosopher, and he's taken the position of relationality, which basically argues that we don't have to think about philosophical zombie issues or the ontology of the self inside an AI, as long as it it's kind of like the radical Turing test, as long as it acts enough like a human being that we feel like it should be endowed with rights, whether it has characteristics, that we shouldn't be arguing about what characteristics it should hold. We should only be looking at whether we feel it should be endowed with rights. Now, I don't like that because I believe that something should have a characteristic in order to have moral standing. And we can debate about what those characteristics are. But if you tell me that just because a kid likes their teddy bear, that the teddy bear, that tearing the head off of a teddy bear is suddenly violence, and create, because they like the teddy bear, I don't agree, right? The teddy bear didn't have what it took to be a moral person. So I'm not comfortable with this position, but I think there's such radical uncertainty about our ability to interrogate the interiority of experience, of whatever experience would be for a machine mind, that we are basically going to be someplace between Gunkel and a position of standing. We're going to be looking for the characteristics that AIs should have in order to be confident that they have morally valuable experiences. But it may be that we will never know, and that we just have to make a decision on the basis of how we feel about it.
Yeah. So I agree. Yeah, I mean, like, there could be completely different views and feelings on the subject that are irreconcilable. How do you reconcile all these different views and feelings on a subject like ripping teddy bears' heads off because somebody thinks that they're sentient, right?
Well, for me, it all comes back to politics. I mean, it's a political project to create a world in which we have the broadest possible embrace of, of the good.
How do you get at the good if all it is just relative opinion that decides what good is?
What else could it be?
Well, I mean, this is the hinge, right? The moral realist and anti-realist hinge. Like if you lean anti-realist, then it could be anything. If you're a moral realist, then it seems as though you've got some grounding to work from.
And that's why people are attracted to it. But it's just it's like saying, without God, there is no right and wrong. It's like, no, we can still come up with right and wrong. We just have to acknowledge that we did it without God.
Yeah, I guess God's one of these ethereal things that's very hard to measure. Yes, whether God exists or not, but there should be at least some course to be able to measure signatures in the real world that can inform ethical decision making, right? That should cross political divides. I mean, that the measurement should be the measurements. The degree of suffering should be measurable at some point. It shouldn't be just some sort of arbitrary pattern that could mean anything. There should be specific patterns in the brain that relate directly to suffering, and patterns in the brain that relate to well-being. In fact, there's already a bunch of research that sort of proves this. David knows more about this, so I think I might see.
It's just the problem of other minds, skeptical problem of other minds, is often reckoned insoluble, but not so. If you consider the conjoined Hogan twins who share a thalamic bridge and can, to some degree, feel each other's feelings, think each other's thoughts, in future it should be possible to rig up reversible thalamic bridge and do partial mind melds with other human and non-human subjects. This is currently rather fanciful, but if one were to do the digital equivalent with one's supposed twin in a classical computer, I don't think the experiment would work. But just going back to what James was saying earlier about rights, as far as I can see, because AlphaDog robots existing architecture are not subjects of experience, they don't have rights, whereas a pig or a chicken, because the pig and chicken are subjects of experience, their interests should be respected accordingly. And I think a lot of people have this implicitly, this kind of dimmer switch metaphor of consciousness, that AI is somehow going to be conscious as it becomes either faster or more sophisticated. But if you look at the most intense forms of experience, they're not logico-linguistic thought episodes or solving differential equations or anything like that. Most intense experiences, agony, orgasmic bliss, uncontrollable panic, and mediated by the most primitive parts of the mind brain. So if one is looking for clues to consciousness, doesn't lie in cognitive sophistication.
That's interesting, because I do think that's a fundamental question. In Citizen Cyborg, I argued that not only should rights be keyed to levels of consciousness, but that implicitly also that there's different kind of suffering. If you're a being that doesn't have a self and there's suffering occurring, it's just occurring. There's no there's no self-suffering. And so the more self you have, the more you suffer, which is a fundamental Buddhist point. So, I would say that there's a fundamental difference between fish, who primarily, they have the experience of suffering, but I don't think they have the self to suffer. Although there's debates, but I think that that's the kind of moral distinction I would make. And so I do believe in a great hierarchy of being. And the problem with the great hierarchy of being in that respect is that what happens when we have something more than human? What if we have human machine hybrid, the Borg, and they have the capacity for, each of them has the capacity for much more pleasure and pain than any one human had, but together they are much more morally consequential than the rest of us. What do we do with that on our grounds? Do you believe in the possibility of moral monsters, or post-persons, as they've sometimes been called, David?
Moral monsters.
A moral monster is, in a utilitarian calculus, if someone has the capacity for much more pleasure and pain than other people, then they should be taken into account.
Utility monsters.
Utility monsters.
Yes,
utility monsters. Yeah.
Negative, and it's particularly tricky in the case of negative utility monsters. Yes, very disturbing kind of experiment. Before I lose the points, sorry, I'm going to backtrack slightly. Some fish, cleaner wrasse social fish, have actually passed the mirror test. So not merely a fish potentially conscious, they are also self-conscious. But I'm very reluctant to tie moral status to reflective self-awareness, because something like panic, for example, as panic becomes in humans, more intense, it becomes uncontrollable, metacognition breaks down. It's still extraordinarily intense, even though there is no longer any self-reflective a person meditating on the nature of what's happening. What else was I going to say? No, that was the essential the essential point. I'll be honest, I get quite frustrated with philosophical discussions about robot rights. As long as we are treating non-humans in the absolutely frightful way we are at present, writing long papers on these zombies, it's missing the real horror that's going on. And as we know, a lot of energy is being devoted at the moment to this idea of AI made, kind of sentience-friendly AI. But the real biggest threat to most sentient beings is currently humans. And the challenge of building sentience-friendly biological intelligence, I find much more daunting.
Yeah, I agree. But what about the utility monsters? Do you?
The
reason I ask about utility monsters is just because I think if you can recognize that some beings are in fact more consequential in a consequentialist calculus than others, then that also applies to animals. But go ahead.
Yes, something like it is possible, for example, that a long-finned pilot whale, who is technically an oceanic dolphin, may experience more intensely than humans, because long-finned pilot whales, they not merely have a neocortex that has also almost twice as many neurons as humans, got a larger mesolimbic dopamine system too. Essentially, they may well be more sentient. And it's, as I said, I don't see any direct moral dilemmas there, but one could contrive various thought experiments in which overriding moral priorities should be going to the most sentient, who might well not be the most intelligent.
Yeah, what kinds, James, what kinds of scientific experiments, what kinds of falsifiable hypotheses do you think would turn the tide in the debate here about whether we should be equating sentience with, more self or larger brains or larger intelligences, or something like David described, the long fin pilot whale might inhabit, or other sentient creatures, maybe even pigs?
I think it was Ben Goertzel who's thinking about this first got me thinking about it, which was, if you think about something like Tononi's integrated information theory, which basically proposes in in a way that can't be tested, but in a way that's at least instructive for heuristic purposes. That all intelligence can be reduced to the idea of recursive information feedbacks in matter, and that applies all the way down to things like thermometers and whatnot, up through humans and past humans, whatever more complex than humans would be. Then part of the question would be, where, if the self, say the self is something we start to see occurring at level 3, and then it gets stronger 4 and 5, do you get to a point of intelligence or recursive information architecture that doesn't self anymore, where the selfing goes away, right? Is that just an epiphenomenon of being in an intermediate stage of intelligence? That's certainly a Buddhist kind of reflection on this, that once you get smart enough and introspective enough and understand how things are working enough, you're not attached to this illusion of self anymore. Whether we will see that empirically in reality or not. And that would be kind of a reassuring in the sense that at least it would take the selfish behavior that we hope machine minds don't develop. It would take that off the table if they got smart enough that they didn't do that. But I think since we've been talking also about digital twinning, I think we are going to be both designing, selecting for, and attempting to express ourselves through AI architectures that we want to behave as if they have selves, and that give as great a simulacrum of the self as possible. And I think we don't know enough about how this introspective thing happens that creates the self to know when it might actually be happening. And that's the big problem here. But yeah, I think the most optimistic scenario is that we could get smart enough not to need selves anymore. Now, what that means for our philosophy and our politics is completely beyond me, because our entire political, at least my political values are based on liberal individualism, the notion that the ideal society is one that's composed of roughly equal individuals expressing their wills. And if we just say, oh, that's an illusion, all we need now is the meta architecture of information that will take us into the future, forget about the individuals. I'm not very comfortable with that, but that may be where we're headed.
Yeah, I do believe integrated information theory does have this concept of phi, which I think you might have been alluding to, which is the empirical verifiable sort of parameter that could be tested there. If phi goes up, then there's more sentience. If phi goes down, then there's less. And yeah, there should be a signature which is easily testable there, and that should be phi, I believe. Is that correct?
That's what he calls it, but it's just, I think most people think that phi can only be measured destructively or in a way dynamically, that you'd have to be able to see everything that was happening in the system, and it's impossible to do so.
But it does seem like a difficult problem then. If what's most important to us can't be measured, then do we have to leave it up to just opinion and debate to sort of decide on what's possible, what the good life really is?
I don't see any alternative. I mean, all the rights system that we have constructed in the last 200 years is a political product, right? There's no natural rights. I don't believe in natural rights, just like I don't believe in moral realism. There's no natural rights in the world. There's an ongoing political project to assert rights and to defend institutions that protect rights. And we might decide that even if we don't know absolutely what's going on inside a humanoid robot's head, that we want to treat it as if it has rights. And just like we could say the same thing about certain kinds of animals. I mean, David, were you at the personhood, rights beyond the personhood? Beyond,
no, Peter Singer was.
Yeah, Peter Singer was there, but I don't think we got you over for that. But back in 2012, we had a conference at Yale where we got robot rights people together with animal rights people, and we tried to talk about these issues. It was a nice frothy conference. At one extreme, the chicken lady who argued for the rights of chickens, and at the other, the people who didn't, the robot rights people who didn't think any animals should have rights.
Yes. Eliezer Yudkowsky has recently updated his credence on. He now thinks that the latest iteration of ChatGPT is conscious, at least to a rudimentary degree. But even though roosters have recently been shown to pass a version of the mirror test, he hasn't actually updated his view on the supposed insentience of non-human animals and babies. So,
yeah, well, you know, I'm not a very consistent Buddhist on that regard. The great chain of being allows me to eat some of the lower chains of being. It's in my moral code.
What's your moral code? Can it have a face? What about oysters and scallops? They don't have faces, or ganglia, as far as I understand. Do they have ganglia, David? Would you say it's morally permissible to eat an oyster?
I wouldn't eat an oyster. A lamprey, for example, has in some ways greater visual intelligence than you or me. A lamprey is thought to be a pentachromat. So, yeah, I mean, I'm saying this in a rather light-hearted way. No, I don't lose sleep over the fate of oysters, but I think yeah, sometimes moral clarity is a good thing. And, you know, when we're trying to convert a tribe of cannibals and some sophist says, is it okay to eat babies if they're already dead, roadkill or something? One says, no, eating babies is wrong. And I think we need the same kind of taboo around harming sentient beings, even on the margins of sentience. This is why sorry.
Well, of course, fetal personhood and the rights of newborns is one of the things that Peter Singer worked on, and that I also worked on when I first came into this field. It's one of the things that led me to write Citizen Cyborg, because I do agree with the moral intuition that if we're substrate independent and we identify a characteristic as the basis of moral standing, such as consciousness, if we see equal consciousness in a perinatal being and an animal, then we should be treating them more or less the same. I think this is becoming increasingly problematic because of the pushback against reproductive rights, the attempt to ban even contraception. So, and artificial wombs, which I've written about. I think once we have artificial wombs, you're going to have much more. Artificial wombs will separate the question of the rights of a fetus from whether it's in a woman or not. It will have property right, the parental property rights, and then the question is, when do parental property rights stop? Because this thing has enough going on that we can't turn it off anymore, which is the same question that we're going to have about machines as well. So I think there are a lot of parallel questions, and we should be substrate independent about it. And so, your opposition to animal farming, of course, I agree. But I think you could equally imagine the engineering out of certain capacities for suffering in animals and in machines. And by the way, I would just point to Anders Sundberg's very interesting paper about this from 10 years ago, about as we begin to develop artificial intelligences that have rudimentary sentience, we should be thinking about them as lab animals. And that just as we don't want to cause unnecessary, we accept that a certain amount of suffering can be caused to a lab animal, but it has to be for a very good reason. We should have the same kind of approach to cyber lab animals. And so, yeah, I think all across the spectrum, humans, animals, and machines, we should be trying to figure out what the characteristics are of moral standing.
How do we update our values then? Like, let's just say we move into a future where we have ultra powerful AI and we're in a position to shape the future civilization in a way in which we think is good, but we're still living with the same values that we have in the early 21st century then? How do we update our values? Is it by the same way as we update our understanding of physics or the universe through science? Is it through rational inquiry? I'd like to get both of your perspectives here, how we are going to update our values in the future. How do we get better values? How do we make progress in value? in understanding what's valuable?
Well, if you think that we're just being dragged around by our self-interests and rationalizing things, you know, that we probably shouldn't, like animal agriculture, animal farming, and you know, our interests will change in the future. An example would be we didn't think about brain death as a category for death until we had organs that we wanted to take out of brain dead people who were being maintained by ECMO, by oxygen machines, breathing machines. And so there was a direct self-interest on the part of all of us in saying, no, that they're dead, we can take their organs now. So it may be that a lot of the things that will drive moral change in the future will be the material interests. Like, and this is one of the concerns about robot rights, is that if people have a rejection of artificial intelligence and robots on the grounds of just being squicked out, or they're taking our jobs or whatever, and refuse to recognize that robots have this moral standing on those grounds, that would be bad, right? So I don't think that there's anything in particular. I think self-interest is one of the things that drives moral change. And I think that's not always good. And so we should be trying to figure out what the consistent application of our Enlightenment values are to these new tech capabilities. But as I said, I think one of the concerns here is that the Enlightenment may not work as a values framework that much longer.
Slightly different perspective I'm going to offer. If conventionally hedonic range today of Darwinian life is -10 to 0 to +10, I think progress will consist in phasing out experience below hedonic 0. Perhaps one can imagine a +5 to a +15 civilization, but ultimately, schematically again, maybe a +70 to a +100 or a +90 to a +90 to a +100 hedonic super civilization. But in that sense, I can see convergence, that if in other Hubble volumes that support life, there's no civilization with an inverted pleasure-pain axis. Essentially, this is the universe's axis of value and disvalue. And in terms of super valuable states that are completely beyond anything physiologically accessible to, essentially, I think, though I'm personally a negative utilitarian, I think our overriding obligation is to get rid of suffering or forms of experience below hedonic 0. And in a purely empirical sense, that we've barely scratched the surface of value, and that when we actually understand the molecular signature of pure bliss and can engineer gradients of essentially extraordinarily rich pleasure, way beyond anything physiologically possible today, feasible to have entire super civilizations, and they will be objectively more valuable than lesser super civilizations that are, let's say, merely have a hedonic range of +15 to +30. Lots of technical complications here. We don't know what are the upper bounds to the size of a single unified subjective experience. This is the binding problem. Again, in terms of the long-term destiny of the cosmos, if one is a strict classical utilitarian, which I'm not, should one be aiming for some kind of utilitarian or hedonium shockwave, which maximizes the abundance of raw value. If one is a negative utilitarian, one can settle for gradients of bliss. But essentially all ethical theories with a single sovereign principle have extraordinarily counterintuitive implications. So
there's a lot of discussion about like what values will look like in the future, but I'm more interested in how we make value progress or moral progress. Is it empirically? Is it definitely not empirically, but completely in the realms of rationality and discourse? Is it mediated just through agency? What does the process of making moral progress look like? Yeah, it's more to my question.
For me, it's that, as I've said, the Enlightenment laid out a kind of a direction that we should go: more freedom, more equality, more control over the affairs of your own life and our collective ability to participate in collective decision making. A society that's guided by reason and science and technology, as opposed to superstition and hereditary authority and so on. We still have a lot of work to do on that agenda, right? And most of the world still could benefit significantly from the spread of those values and the social institutions that I think maximize those values, which are liberal democracy. But we may already be at the end of the capacity of liberal democracy to be an exciting future vision. I mean, I think this is one of the problems, one of the reasons for the rise of authoritarianism in the last 10 years is that liberal democracy is on shaky ground in terms of demonstrating its capacity to meet challenges, to provide for the collective good. And so, for me, a lot of my concern about the future of values is, well, we haven't finished with the values we already got yet. Let's push the values we got as far as they could go. And if they really stop working, we could come up with some new values. But
this clash of values that could happen could be catastrophic. I mean, we don't want to allow a value to run its course only to find out it's existentially catastrophic. If we can see signatures of that happening in the process, and this is what I mean by, like, how do we define moral progress? How do we define progress and values? Is there anything that we can measure along the way that can tell us whether we need to course correct or not? It's difficult.
Well, let's bring it back to the question of long-termism. One of the things that has got me interested in this long-termism question, in addition to the fact that it became a bit of a political flashpoint last year, was that I do think that shrinking birth rates globally reflect a certain amount of pessimism about the future, certainly individual level pessimism. There are a lot of different factors that are driving the decline of fertility. But that, as on the whole, a population that's shrinking because it doesn't want to reproduce itself is probably a bad sign, right? And so the kinds of social changes, I still think societies haven't found the price point yet of what it takes to convince people that they could be as happy as parents as they were as non-parents. We have to find that price point, because otherwise the situation gets very bad. But I also don't think we want to go to a future where we take away reproductive choice, right? Some people, especially on the right, argue that this catastrophe of shrinking global populations is sufficient for us to do away with reproductive freedom as a value. And I'm not there, right? As I said, I'm an Enlightenment guy. I think we should defend reproductive freedom. We need to create the social institutions that support a reproductively free and reproducing population. So, again, we may come to some, because of necessity, we may come to some new accommodations in our values about how to structure society and how to structure reproduction in ways that we currently can't imagine, some kind of value change just out of necessity. But I hope that it is a balance. I hope that the foundation is reproductive freedom, and that we try to convince people to have kids in non-coercive ways.
I confess, an antinatalist, albeit a soft antinatalist. I urge hard antinatalists to reconsider, because this is not going to fix the problem of suffering. But personally, I'm very skeptical it's possible to make a moral case for bringing more life and suffering into the world. So yeah, as I said, I'm with my very dark conception of Darwinian life and the universe, I'm very wary of encouraging fertility. That said, given that the future belongs to life lovers, I think prospective parents do have this obligation to load the genetic dice in favor of their children by pre-selecting, customizing benign alleles, high hedonic set point, high hedonic range, extremely high pain tolerance, which is now feasible. On the issue of moral progress, regardless of whether one believes in objective moral values, by getting rid of suffering, one gets rid of empirical disvalue. I mean, in a world animated by gradients of bliss, there aren't subjectively disvaluable states in the way that there are now.
Oh, David, I don't understand how you can be a moral realist in the sense of saying, well, look, everybody values less pain and more pleasure in the world, but not say the same thing about the capacity of a society to reproduce itself. Every society, has eventually, through natural selection of cultural evolution, every society has a pronatalist instinct or value of some kind, right? Implicitly. So why doesn't your moral realism lead to pronatalism?
Essentially, by creating new life, one is bringing new involuntary suffering into the world. One is creating essentially a sentient being with a lethal genetic disease, an opioid habit that the kid is impotent to satisfy. One is essentially creating a great deal more suffering to appease what, for evolutionary reasons, is this need that most people feel.
But what you're saying is there are some moral intuitions that are universally shared that validate moral realism. Other moral intuitions that are universally shared are absolutely wrong, is what you're saying, right? I just understand how you can say both things.
But for evolutionary reasons, involuntary childlessness causes a great deal of suffering. And so, sure, there are big tensions there. And to stress once again, I don't go around advocating hard extinctionist antinatalism, ephilism. The future belongs to life lovers. We should act accordingly. But nonetheless, essentially, having a kid is bringing more. Is bringing more suffering into the world, and I don't see how that can be ethically justified. But I accept that the future belongs to life lovers. That negative utilitarians like me will go extinct, and the sooner the better. But that's the reason we're going to go extinct, is because we're going to phase out the biology of suffering.
For negative utilitarians only. Well, I mean,
suffering is just so stupid. I mean, life on Earth deserves this more civilized signaling system that, given that life could be animated by gradients of intelligent bliss, it is just so much more rational to go down that route. I mean, at times can sound like a teleological determinist, but when essentially we can choose our own hedonic range, hedonic set point for both for ourselves and our children, there's going to be tremendous selection pressure in ratcheting up hedonic range, hedonic set points.
Sure, absolutely. So you think that people should choose their own cognitive architecture, that choose their own sentience sort of spectrum? What if some people actually make the choice to suffer a little bit, right? Would you be okay with that? Is that, as a negative utilitarian, should that be allowed?
Well, if they perceive that their choices are being compromised, this can itself cause suffering and distress. So it's complicated. But what is the negative utilitarian position on nostalgia or hot food or sadomasochism? Mixed states are a complication. But negative utilitarianism, it's generally best avoided as a term because of its associations. I prefer to systematize compassion. This sort of Buddha, I teach one thing only, suffering, the end of suffering. Whether or not he actually said it, we don't know, but it's plausible, the kind of thing he might say. I mean, that's the NU position. But if you're NU, you're not going around plotting to bump people off, and you can support, which I do, enshrining in law the sanctity of human and non-human life. But yeah, ethically speaking, that is how I gauge progress in terms of society, civilization, what it is doing to minimize, prevent, and ultimately abolish suffering. Sadly, the amount of suffering in the world is probably going up each year with the continuing spread of factory farming. It'd be wonderful to think that the AI revolution is going to lead to the first year that actually suffering declines in the world. Hard to imagine, but
I'll just say on David's gradients of bliss, I think we've had this conversation before, but I have some skepticism about that proposition. First, on the hedonic treadmill grounds, the notion that once we establish a new parameter of this is the maximum amount of happiness you can have and this is the minimum amount, that just becomes the new normal and that becomes the new suffering. That's one kind of argument. There's the argument empirically that if you look at people's daily mood and we look at like the top 1% in terms of positive daily mood, they accomplish less with their lives than the people who are somewhat more dissatisfied. Hypomania, people who have mental conditions that keep them extraordinarily happy, make extraordinarily bad decisions, tend to cause themselves suffering in the long run. And then there's a kind of mythological argument, which is in Buddhism, there's 6 realms of being that range from heavens to hells. And it's said that being a human is the luckiest of rebirths, because even though you have only experienced it for a short time compared to heaven or hell, if you're reborn in heaven, you're stuck there for a very long time, and you're just distracted by how much happiness there is. You don't actually make progress towards the goal of nirvana. And I think there's something that kind of relates back to the previous point about the people empirically, the people who are the happiest around us. Tend to be so happy that they don't aspire, they don't achieve as much as the rest of us. So
it would push back. I mean, the standard example I give here is Anders Sandberg. I mean, he's much cited. I do have a ridiculously high hedonic set point. I mean, he was prompted to say this. This was just the way the world is, as from Anders' perspective. But I think probably most people here know Anders. Essentially exceptionally high hedonic set point, bounces through life, yet extremely socially responsible, incredibly productive. I would like to get his full genome sequenced and understand better. Occasionally just a little hint of the hypermanic, but never anything more. And shows that it really is possible to have exceptionally high hedonic set point, be super productive, super functional. One shouldn't put too much stead on a single example. One could cite other people too. But yeah, imagine a civilization of super Anders, so to speak.
I would like to. But yeah, I mean, Anders is an existing human being. So even if he's at 10 on a scale of 0 to 10, I think what you're proposing is a scale from 11 to 13. And
it will be possible. I'm not saying I don't consider it morally urgent in the same way, but rather than after the world's last experience below hedonic 0, just resting on our laurels, so to speak, I would imagine that the diet, we will continue to push and push further. I think how one solves the binding problem is relevant here too. But yeah, imagine if one really can adjust the hedonic dials. One can choose not just hedonic set points, but hedonic range, what is optimal for sentient beings, and other things being equal. Yeah, the higher the hedonic experience, the more valuable that experience will subjectively be perceived. I don't pretend I know what kind of, as philosophers say, intentional objects our successors will fetishize and value, but I'm modestly confident that, yeah, I was going to say the pleasure-pain axis, the super pleasure axis has an extraordinarily long future, stretching billions, trillions of years ahead.
Gabriel Leuenberger did ask a question in the comments here, and he asked David, but I think both David and James can perhaps answer this. Are you a closed individualist or an open individualist or an empty individualist, or are you agnostic about this question?
I'm personally an empty individualist. I think it's a convenient fiction. If one had to say my ancestral namesake yesterday did blah, 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 life would be impossible. But yeah, in a kind of strict sense of identity, anything, if A equals B, everything true of A should be true of B, which isn't the case even of, one's namesake of 5 minutes ago. So yeah, an empty individualist.
Same.
But in many ways, very Buddhist.
What does that say about your ideal view of post-human makeup? I mean, if there's no individual identity which is really passed from one moment to the next, what does that say about the ideal construction of future civilization, in your views?
Well, if you follow the Buddhist insight that the illusion of self and the defense of the illusion of self is the cause of a lot of our suffering, that can lead in a variety of different directions. Your first direction probably would not be the Millsian one, that we should have a society where we should all pursue our own individual desires to the fullest extent possible. But I think you can make an argument for why that kind of society will eventually lead to both more happiness and more self-understanding and more of whatever the Buddhist wants. So I don't think that there's any necessary social political conclusion of a post-individualist or non-individualist view of human consciousness, because you could use it to rationalize authoritarianism, Confucianism, communism, liberalism, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that is the nature of reality. And so whatever reality you want to construct, you have to base it on that.
I think a lot of the world's most worthwhile things are done with people with a very strong sense of an enduring metaphysical ego. And for example, people tackling the problem of aging, which really is a horrific problem. Many of them are animated by this fear of dying. And even though I'm a skeptic about enduring personal identity, I would support opt-out cryonics. I don't think an advanced civilization, our successors, would really consider it ethical to reanimate Darwinian malware. But I think the option that should exist, and opt-out cryonics, would actually help defang death.
My wife and I are gearing up to retire, and one of the projects that we keep talking about is giving away everything in our house until we die, and we only have left like a bowl and a pair of chopsticks. And my fantasy about a radically extended life expectancy is somewhat similar. I mean, I think there'll probably be people who choose to just keep on living, who change their, through natural selection, the ones who survive will be the ones who figure out how to want to survive. And so that may have certain consequences, but I think the possibility of running across a patch of ennui where you decide that you've done what you needed to do, and that you start giving yourself away. This is what I imagine, like, if what's really important is our memories, the degree to which we can capture them, store them, share them, endow them to others is probably the degree to which we will feel like we've done what we need to do before we ourselves don't need to be here anymore. So I expect that most people believe they're, if death is a choice, most people will die through some kind of conscious process of just saying, I've done enough.
So, I mean, a lot of people die through aging today. Is this how you think people die in the future, like post-humans who have the optionality to continue to exist? They'll just say, okay, I've done what I need to do. I've experienced everything I want to experience. It's time for me to shuffle off this coil. No longer mortal, for all practical purposes, but this coil.
I'm skeptical here. I think our successors will find life self-intimatingly valuable. I don't know when the world's last suicide self-deliverance will be. It's currently 800,000 a year. But one of the things that tackling the problem of suffering and creating a world based on gradients of bliss will do, basically the happier one is, the more meaningful life feels. And whereas if you become depressed, life drains of all meaning, purpose becomes empty. As you become happier, things seem more and more significant. I mean, there are the pathological forms such as mania, in which everything feels indiscriminately hyper-significant. But if we do decide to make the transition to a world underpinned by gradients of bliss, it won't just simply that transhumans, post-humans are super happy. I think their existence will seem supercharged with meaning and significance, and the idea of bringing it to an end could well be unthinkable. That's a conjecture.
I recommend that everyone pick up Stanislav Lem's Futurological Congress. Nice, short little novel. It's about a future in which we all have access to drugs that can make us feel whatever we want. And the only drug that's illegal is the drug that takes away the effects of drugs. Because once you start doing that, you realize that instead of, having a totally idyllic existence, you're actually lying face down in a slop tray, with a bunch of other poorly dressed people. And I think that's the worry, is that the degree to which we have control over sentiment, direct control over our brains and our sentiments, is the degree to which, yes, we could imagine people being tweaked to be happy, to be so happy that they want to have kids, to be so happy that they want to be good workers or whatever it is. We can imagine that, but is that really the future we want, where we're constantly manipulating our motivations in that way?
I don't know. I mean, once we're more able to actually understand reality and carve it at its joints, have a more complete sort of picture of what's really going on underneath that scaffolding our sentience, and the potential to increase that and explore novel vistas that are currently just unimaginable to us now. I'd say that it would be a pretty fun thing to do, and maybe it's something that we can do forever, for as much time as there is in the before the heat death of the universe. I mean, I think that's a similar approach that Anders thinks about the problem. But he's a life lover.
He certainly is.
Stanislav Lem's work at I forget what his title for the book is. There's a really interesting movie called The Congress, partially animated, that is so worth seeing. I thoroughly recommend it if you have the time.
Which anticipates the movie, The Congress, anticipates the fight that SAG-AFTRA just had over AI rights to actors' personas, which is maybe the labor struggle of the future. I appreciate having an audience. Thank you for joining us today.
Yes, please. Thank you very much indeed.
It ennobles this conversation. We weren't just trading barbs with each other.
That's true. Well, is there any other conclusive or summing up thoughts that you'd like to put on the table now before we close the discussion?
Well, I acknowledged before we got on that I've been kind of depressed politically since Trump was elected, really. But I think I've invested a lot of hope in the moral progress of the world towards, a liberal democratic world federalism that would protect everybody's rights and start doing good things. And the world doesn't look the way that I expected. So I've been putting more of my hopes in disruptive technological change, for however rational that is. But I have been paying a lot more attention to technological change, and I think artificial intelligence, genetics, as David has pointed to, is going to change the way that we live very dramatically in the next 10 to 20 years. So to the degree that we should be thinking about how to shape that in a positive direction, I think that's what we should be talking about.
Agree.
That makes sense. Yeah, my message, I suppose, yeah, let's fix the problem of suffering. Everything else is details, ethically speaking.
Well, it's been wonderful having you two. You guys have known each other for a very long time. You know, the transhumanist or the futurologist scene was relatively small, but it is sort of grown. And I guess the things that you guys have been thinking about and talking about for, you know, decades and decades ago have become very relevant. So it's great to have you guys sit together and hash out your views and discuss these issues. So thank you so much for carving out the time to do this. And yes, I look forward to hearing more from you guys in the future.
Well, big ups to you, Adam. You've been doing this for what, 15 years, being kind of the peripatetic videographer of the transhumanist movement. So thank you.
Incredible. I don't always do it, but yes, I lose track of the number of times of people who say complimentary things. It's a tremendous resource you have online. And it's yes, kudos, very, very much appreciated. Yeah.
Well, I do intend to keep on going for as long as I can. So thanks.
If you don't, we may have to stick a wire in your head.
Yeah, please do.
Okay.
Preferably one that has a button that I can press every time I want to feel good. Right.
There you go.
All right, guys. Thanks so much for your time. Thanks so much for the audience participation as well. And I look forward to another one in the future. Please share and subscribe and look forward to the next one. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.